Hello, everyone. This is Melody or Rantia, and I am with MarketSphere Consulting. I lead our operations for MarketSphere here in the Southwest. MarketSphere is really proud to be an Oracle Certified Advantage Partner, and we've proven ourselves as a leader in helping organizations deploy Oracle solutions, which include the Enterprise Performance Management suite of applications, which you may know as the Hyperion products. I'm delighted today to introduce our clients from Amegy Bank, who with me today will describe their experience using Oracle's Hyperion products to improve their planning process and enable their finance organization to deliver improved value for their business. Here's how we're going to spend the time today. I'll start by brief introductions of who's on the call. Then we'll hear from Amegy about their current situation, their prior situation, how the goals that they set aside for their project, the evolution that they've taken around their planning journey, and the benefits that they've realized. And then we'll get a brief overview of the Hyperion planning solution set. We also will allow some time for questions at the end of the presentation. So to ask a question, if you look on your chat window on the WebEx there and send a message to all panelists, we'll capture your questions as we go along, and I'll address them, as many as we can, at the end. So first, let me take a minute and introduce our speakers for today. I'm pleased to introduce Laura Davenport, who's the Assistant Vice President of Planning at Amegy Bank, and she is the lead Hyperion administrator. She's been with Amegy since 2001 and has joined the planning team there in 2005. Laura has a Bachelor of Arts in Business from Southwestern University and an MBA in Finance from the University of St. Thomas. Also on the call is Bill Harding. Bill is a director with our organization, MarketSphere Consulting. He is a CPA with subject matter expertise in the utility and energy industries and has in-depth experience with budgeting, strategic planning, and performance management software solutions. Bill also specializes in process and technical assessments and assist clients in vendor and process reviews. So without further ado, I'll turn it over to Laura.
As a brief background on Amegy, we're one of the largest regional banks in Houston. We've got 83 locations. 71 of those are in Houston, 5 are in San Antonio, and 7 are in the Dallas market. We offer a broad range of banking services, everything from commercial and private banking to retail and mortgage lending. We have 1,600 employees or so and an asset size of about $11 billion. So to set the stage for the situation we were in before we implemented the Hyperion suite of products, our data requirements basically outgrew our ability to manage the data in the way that we needed. Our budget process was based on a bottoms-up approach and still is, so it was at the cost center level. And at the time we had 85 cost centers, but before we implemented Hyperion, that number actually grew to 250. In 2002, with that growth combined with our data needs at the cost center level, we were running an Excel-based model, and it eventually slowed down and ground to a halt. What we did was use Excel files to collect data at each cost center for the budget, and then we rolled up all those files with a lot of linking to get our final product. And each of those Excel file tabs, each of those Excel files had about 15 worksheets or tabs, and they were each about 12 megs, and we were emailing them around and interofficing them around, and it was just cumbersome, to say the least. So after about 3 years of trying to store 85 to 250 files at 12 megs each, server space became an issue. Our analysis was really painful. There's a limit to the number of links you can embed in each Excel file. So we actually had to set up a pyramid scheme for linking all those files together, where we would have one file at the top that would refer to, say, a dozen other linked files, and each of those files would then be linked to a dozen files of their own. And so analysis was just an extremely painful process. So any reforecasting or in-depth trending was becoming impossible. We certainly couldn't turn it around on any sort of a timely basis. And aggregating or re-aggregating new data was just a bear. So we knew that we needed a new architecture that would allow for flexibility and growth, and that began our evolution from Excel to Essbase. So our goals, our number one goal was to be able to provide a single version of the truth. It was difficult to provide consistent and detailed financial reporting with our Excel-based environment and all those files. A second goal was reduce data entry and verification because the bank was growing and we were adding new branches. We were developing new lines of business. We were making acquisitions and expanding into new cities. So as I mentioned earlier, we needed a flexible architecture, but we still needed space for growth. And as a final but still very important goal, we needed user acceptance. We needed something that our users would accept as an easy system to interface with and something that they would know had data integrity and something that they could trust. So with that being said, we'll walk through the actual evolution from the dark ages, if you will, through an implementation of Hyperion Essbase and then eventually our implementation of reports and planning on top of that. So back in the dark ages, our planning cycle began right around Labor Day and ran through the spring about mid-March, and it was a 6.5-month process. So more than half of our year was spent in the planning cycle. Then when we implemented Essbase, we were able to start a little bit later, mid-September, and then wrap up by mid-February. And when we finally laid planning and reports on top of that, we were actually able to shorten our time to about 6 weeks or a month and a half. And so we gained 5 months of our year back and wound up with a much more, not only a more efficient process, but a higher quality product in the end. So I'll give you a brief overview of our planning process, which hasn't changed. We still do the same basic planning process. It's just how we do it is much more efficient. On the left-hand column in the slide, you'll see the basic steps that we go through. And so we have a top-down budget that's prepared by executive management. So it's their perspective from sort of the top of the house of what they expect to see in the next planning year. And that's just a simple Excel file, and you'll see in the next couple of slides that process hasn't changed because it's very few people that are actually involved in that process, and so we're able to just keep it a very straightforward approach. The next step in our planning cycle is to prepare bottom-up plans at the cost center level, and this is really where we were struggling before because it was a manual process. It was those linked Excel files that I mentioned. We had data quality issues with maybe we would send an Excel file to a user and they would insert a row, for example, and that would just throw the whole thing off. We had maintenance problems because once we've cloned and made 85 copies of the basic template, if we found some sort of typo or formula error and we'd already propagated it 85 ways, it was obviously really difficult to go back through and do any sort of maintenance on the fly. And there was no scalability. There was no way to add any more links in an Excel file. You had to roll out another leg of the pyramid scheme that I mentioned before. The next step in the process is to aggregate that data and assemble it into reports. At this point in time, just to aggregate those basic Excel files took about 8 hours. And all that got us was a single report. We had no drill down capability. If we saw a number that looked like a complete bust, we had no way of knowing where the bust was. We'd have to open up all of those Excel files with educated guesses and try to find where the problem was. So there was no quick way to drill down and assess or analyze the data quality. Our next step in the process is to get together and have budget review meetings. And at this point, we really just reviewed the bottoms-up end product with the CFO. Once the business owners provided their insight from their cost center level. We really didn't follow up with them. That was really the last they heard from us. We took their numbers and ran with them, and they got a final product in the form of a report at the very end of the cycle, but that was the extent of their engagement in the process. The next step is to make any revisions and re-aggregate the data and reanalyze it. This was cumbersome at best. We had 85 to 250 spreadsheets to analyze. So there was a huge cost benefit of if we wanted to change a number, not only do we have to find the right spreadsheet in the right place and hope we didn't corrupt any links or have any sort of architectural breakdown, but we had to go through that reaggregation. And if that didn't yield something that we expected, we'd have to start all over again. Once we got the bottoms up in the format that we needed, we would reconcile it with the top down. In other words, how did the perspective of executive management from the top of the house reconcile with what our managers in the trenches, if you will, were seeing for their expectations for the next planning year? So perhaps our bottoms-up folks knew that our legal expenses would be, twice what we thought it would be in the top down, and so we would have to manage that gap and say, well, which one is actually more appropriate, and is there a communication gap, and is there a strategic discussion that needs to happen? Finally, when we got one version of the plan, that is the top-down agreed with the bottom-up, we would have a data entry process into our accounting system, and that would take an additional 2 to 3 weeks. It was literally someone sitting in a cube typing numbers into a mainframe database. So obviously that was fraught with data integrity issues. And then finally we would have report distribution, and we had one single report set. We printed it off the mainframe, we stapled it, and we inter-officed it to all those bottoms-up guys. And as I mentioned earlier, that was the first that they had heard from us since back in September when they had submitted their numbers. So then we began our age of enlightenment, and we implemented Hyperion Essbase. Again, the top-down didn't change. And really the bottom-up, it only changed slightly. It was still it was an improved manual process. It was still manual, though. We still had Excel templates. They were powered by Essbase on the back end, but we still had folks typing in numbers into a template. We had some VBA code that helped run some of the Essbase engine, but it was not intuitive for our users, especially our folks that whose job isn't necessarily bent towards finance. For example, there was a VBA module that had a save icon on it, and you had to hit that save button in order to trigger the load into the Essbase server. So we had a lot of folks hitting the normal save button at the top on the menu for Excel, and then they would lose their data, and it was still a pretty cumbersome process. But where Essbase did help us immediately was that it reduced our aggregation time. So before we were manually aggregating linked Excel files, and as I mentioned, that took about 8 hours. Well, once we had our infrastructure set up in Essbase, that was shaved down to literally 5 minutes. And once the data was into the Essbase server, our group was able to access that data and analyze it literally on the fly. So everything I mentioned earlier about having to find the right Excel file to open and hope that you were making the right educated guess about where the bust in the data was, that was all gone. We had full drill down capability. We were able to set up a tiered hierarchy system with several levels of responsibility. And so we were able to drill through from the very top of the house to the very bottom cost center level and easily see what our trends were, where our data problems were. We were able to assess what was right and accurate and what wasn't. We were able to follow up with our managers who provided that data and level set their expectations with what we were seeing on the top down. And so really Essbase helped our group of analysts. Once we got the data in there from the bottoms-up folks, we were able to drill around, aggregate, re-aggregate, and revise data as needed. So when it came time to reconcile the top-down with the bottom-up, we were able to do a true gap analysis because we made a thorough review of all the data. So, for example, we knew with certainty that the bottoms-up folks really were requesting twice as much in legal expense as the top-down reflected. And so we, instead of sitting in budget review meetings wondering if the data could be right or not, we instead spent our time having a discussion between the managers who were requesting those funds and the executive managers who maybe didn't see that coming. And so there was an interaction there that we certainly didn't have before. And in terms of the data entry process, once we had a final plan, we were actually able to take, instead of taking the plan and feeding it into our accounting system, we were able to take the data from the accounting system and feed it to Essbase. So now we had one system where the budget lived, if you will, alongside actuals. So we could put plan next to actuals and do budget variance analysis and that kind of thing. So there was no need to do a separate data entry process. And then we were able to do reports in Excel through the Essbase add-in on the fly. So we could do our standard reporting process to those bottoms-up managers and give them their feedback in terms of, okay, here's your approved budget. But if they needed more detail or if they needed it laid out a different way or perhaps expanded into a monthly view, whereas before maybe we provided it quarterly, we would be able to do that within a matter of seconds. So before we had a very rigid set of reports that just had no capability to change whatsoever. They were just very standardized reports off the mainframe. So Essbase really gave us a lot of horsepower within the finance group to take the data that we received from executive management in the form of the top-down and from our managers on the ground in the form of the bottoms-up and really expand our capability of what we could do and how quickly we could do it. And then that bottoms-up process that I mentioned really gained its efficiency whenever we implemented planning and reports. So just to give you an idea, the bottom-up plans prepared by cost center step, that second step, that was about a 6-week process in the dark ages. It dropped to about 4 weeks when we had Essbase. And when we put planning and reports on, it dropped to about 2 weeks. And that's because it was scalable. It gave us a scalable interface that we could change in one place in the planning web form. And that changed it for everyone who would access that web form going forward. So we changed it in one place and didn't have to make 250 copies. And the users logged in and saw it immediately. And then also it was a very easy to use interface. And I actually run a training class for new planners every year, everyone that's going to be involved in the planning process for the first time. And in about an hour's time, I can give them a tour of all the different web forms. And it's very intuitive because it's a graphical user interface. You click a save button and it does exactly what you think it would do. You click a cancel button and it does exactly what we're all familiar with on a basic web form design. So the training time was actually greatly reduced. The maintenance of those web forms was greatly reduced, and then the quality of the data that we were getting really started to greatly improve.
Laura, if I could, I'd like to elaborate a little bit around the interface. We're talking about Hyperion planning in this particular aspect, and it's a web interface or web forms, as Laura had talked about. It's a user-friendly format. You can use drop-down boxes to provide easy selections. The security will filter the data to show only the data that the end users should have access to. The web forms are straightforward. They're intuitive. Basically, you just input the data, click the Save button. The data is saved, aggregated, and ready for review. The improved data process is one of the reasons that data truly has gone, or the data entry process has gone from 6 weeks to 2 weeks. And I was talking with Laura earlier, I really think that the 2 weeks is more of a convenience to the end users. If they're like me, most users will probably get in there at the very last day of the process. So it doesn't take 2 weeks. It's more of a convenience aspect for those end users to get that data into the system.
Thanks, Bill. That's all very true. And another really important point is that users had immediate access through Hyperion reports to the data that they submitted, both for the plan and also for their actuals for the prior year or the prior 2 years. So they didn't have to go through a middleman before they submitted their data to our group and then waited to hear back from our group. And now with planning and reports in place, they log in at their leisure. It can be 10 o'clock at night if they're still here at the office. It can be 6 o'clock in the morning. And they really don't have a limit to the depth to which they can analyze their own data. And so that in and of itself provided a streamlining effect because we didn't have to wait and aggregate the data to see that there was a problem. Our users were able to aggregate just their division, for example, and see that, no, we didn't intend to put that much in consulting fees in. Maybe we put $100,000 and we really meant to put in $10,000. So they can see that and correct it on their own without having to wait for me to see that and come follow up with them. So that was huge. And really what that did was it expanded ownership of the process and accountability for their data to them and out of our group, which is limited in resources and headcount. And it really was an expansion of the process being owned by the entire bank and something that everyone could participate in. And so it really added a lot of quality to our overall plan process. And in terms of revising and re-aggregating the data, when a user goes in and perhaps makes that correction from $100,000 to $10,000, we're able to aggregate the data instantly, and they can immediately see that, yes, the data was corrected, and they don't have to worry about it from that point on. And so the gap analysis step, when we're reconciling top-down to bottom-up, we didn't have to worry about, was this accidentally entered? Is this some sort of typo? We can really sit down and talk about strategic needs of the company versus what executive management was expecting. And then finally, in terms of data entry into the accounting system, Hyperion has really evolved into one version of the truth. Not only do we not have to do any data entry from Hyperion into our mainframe accounting system anymore, but instead of looking to that mainframe, we've been able to provide accurate and timely data to the point where people look to Hyperion first and not to the core legacy systems. And that has been a key development in our process as well.
One of the things that I wanted to address here too is we always talk about one version of the truth, but a major point of emphasis I would like to make is that Amegy's budgeting process went from, in my opinion, a reactive to a proactive approach. The system now in place allows Amegy planners to review their information, to make changes, reanalyze data on the fly, resulting in a very accurate data set that's been reviewed and vetted prior to executive management ever seeing the information. Now executive management begins their analysis of the assumptions behind the numbers immediately instead of worrying about the accuracy of the data like they did in the previous processes. And I really feel this is a huge advantage and one of the reasons the budgeting process works so well at Amegy.
And Bill, just to expand on that, one of the things that I talk about in those training classes for new planners is I really try to underscore the importance of them knowing their own data for their own individual cost centers. because when they're entering data and then reporting on it afterwards, if they know what they've been running in terms of consulting fees for the prior year already when the process begins, they don't have to do much analysis. They can have access to their data year-round, and that not only helps the planning process, but it helps those end users manage their own lines of business, and that has improved everyone's capability at Amegy as a whole to really run the bank. So we're really proud of the process that we put in place, and going from 6.5-month process to a 1.5-month process has really saved our group a lot of wear and tear in terms of just mental exhaustion. Because we only spend 6 weeks of the year on our planning cycle, that has allowed us to expand into other projects that are analytical in nature, but that may or may not have anything at all to do with the planning process. And so we're able to enhance the product that our group is able to provide and the services that we're able to provide to the rest of the bank. And so it's really been a tremendous tool set for us. In terms of the benefits realized, probably the biggest benefit is that aggregation process has gone from 8 hours down to 5 minutes. It significantly reduced the time that we need to prepare the budget and gave us more time to analyze the data, which in reality, I mean, we're a group of analysts, so we need to be analyzing the data and not copying and pasting Excel templates and looking for broken links. It's improved our data integrity and increased our ability to react to business or assumption changes we need to make as we need to make them. And so, again, it's been a huge improvement on how we do our job. The other thing I want to say is, in terms of infrastructure, we've been able to expand from the 85 cost centers, which grew to 250 when we implemented, and now we have, probably 1,500 to 2,000 cost centers, which is something that we would never have even considered back when we were in the dark ages of the Excel days. We just could not afford to expand our infrastructure because we had no scalability. And so with the same number of folks in our group, we've got a better product in terms of the planning cycle. It takes 5 months less time, and we've been able to expand our infrastructure from 250 to about 1,500 cost centers. And so definitely seen some significant improvement, and we have room left to grow and the flexibility we need to be able to do a good job of it. So that's all I had, unless we had some questions a little bit later.
Thank you, Laura and Bill both. Really appreciate you taking the time to walk us through the story at Amegy. I would guess that many of you have either recently completed or you may even still be in your annual planning process. And my guess is some of you can probably relate to the dark ages that Laura was describing at Amegy and may have some of your own scars from your process that you're dealing with right now. There are solutions, obviously, to address this as Amegy has deployed with the Hyperion product suite. So to that end, what I'd like to do now, and a quick reminder, please continue to submit your questions, and we'll address those at the end. I have gotten a couple already, so thank you very much. And what I'd like to do now is introduce to you Rhonda Great, who is with Oracle. And Rhonda has been with Oracle for over 5 years now. And prior to that, she was employed by Hyperion Solutions for 5 years, focusing on their enterprise performance management applications. Rhonda really excels at helping organizations understand what the value is of identifying these performance improvements in the areas of budgeting, planning, and forecasting, as well as business intelligence. Rhonda, is your microphone open, and are you ready to go?
I'm ready to go. Thank you very much. I appreciate it. Well, good morning, everyone, or good afternoon now, everyone. I want to take a little bit of time and, thank Amegy for going and highlighting some of their successes they've had with Hyperion Planning. I'm going to focus on, for the next 10 minutes, the Oracle Enterprise Performance Management Suite, which actually Hyperion Planning is one of the core products of that offering. Enterprise performance management, for those of you who are not familiar with that terminology, really is a discipline. It's a discipline that allows you, organizations, to set their strategic goals, link those goals, those strategies and goals to their performance. It's all about driving performance and allowing the customer to monitor that performance as we're going. So it is all about timely, accurate, and relevant information to those parties that need it in order to make better decisions to drive better performance for the organization. And again, Hyperion Planning is one of the modules under our umbrella of EPM applications that provides our organizations with that foundation. So going forward, if we just look at what that set of applications are for Oracle, this is that umbrella term of Enterprise Performance Management, which I'm going to refer to as EPM at this point, has to do with bringing in, is an open environment that brings in multiple sources of information from across your enterprise, whether it's Excel, whether it's a ERP solution, whether it's Essbase, whatever source information of data needs to come into a common foundation in order for everyone to have that single version of truth. From that common foundation, customers typically have two sides of needs. One is from a business analytic perspective. How do we do? How do we look going forward? Getting dashboards and getting analytics. The other one has to do with, now that we know how we performed, how do we monitor and change our performance and set goals going forward? So we have performance management applications. The blue, as you can see, represents the Hyperion planning, consolidation, activity-based management, and scorecarding. Those are the traditional applications that Oracle purchased when they bought Hyperion. What Oracle has on the other side in the green is intelligence. It's all about data management, data warehousing information. It's about key analytical information that drives the business. So there's two parts to it. One's forward-looking, the other one is seeing how you perform so that you can monitor and change the information. Now, as we move forward, let's break these down a little bit further. So the business intelligence analytics really is about managing towards risk and performance. So it looks at, we provide over, I think the last count was well over 450 key performance dashboards, role-based dashboards that look at everything across financials, supply chain, looks at HR analytics and projects to see how the organization is performing and to identify any risk so that we can improve forecast accuracy, we can manage our performance, overall performance better across all these different operational areas. Now as we move on, we start to break that down and say business analytics is really what we provide out of the box is a solution that integrates all data together from your environment, your core environment. It provides basic user-friendly dashboards, role-based dashboards that are based on best practice key performance indicators across all the different areas. And these applications are designed to let the business user become much more self-service and involved as far as how they get information. So that's one side of the house of the EPM application suite. So here's again is another set that kind of just looks at and identifies some of the key metrics or key areas that these analytics, these packaged analytics will bring to an organization. So at the end of the day, it's one window into performance. It's about integrating to Microsoft Office products, providing information at any point, any time across the organization, but basically giving you a full structure of web-based analytics so that you can monitor performance of the organization. When we talk about these analytics, the value point, I have a customer, Compass Bank, who was able to reduce their credit card write-off debt by 7% by implementing and incorporating the business intelligence suite of applications within their structure. They also were able to gain reporting time, reduce their risk analysis reporting time by 75% because they were able to get information in real-time, quick mode. Time to value, it took them, when we talk about these types of applications, generally it takes a long time for organizations to realize that type of value from analytics, but Compass Bank was a 6-week implementation of the intelligence applications. So now let's look at the performance management side of the applications under the EPM system. So performance management applications really is about connecting all the management processes together. Whether you're looking at strategic planning, where you're looking at your debt covenants and managing mergers and acquisitions, whether you're doing what Amegy did, and that is managing to your plan and your forecast. You also have a financial close process that needs to be brought into the loop. And then, of course, how profitable are my product services as well as customers. So EPM actually is a connective group that brings all these pieces together. When we talk about the critical components to closing your financial books in a best practice fashion, we provide an application called Hyperion Financial Management. Hyperion Financial Management gives you the ability to accelerate the reporting cycle and reduce the cost of compliance by giving you smart dimensionality, by allowing you to it has powerful reporting and analysis capability. It is web architecture. All the applications that we have within the EPM suite is web architecture so that users get access to information anytime, anywhere. It is a patented consolidation application. So if you have a need across your organization to manage complex consolidation issues such as minority ownership, if you have a need to deal with intercompany elimination, you're dealing with multiple sources, you're dealing with a lot of currency issues. Financial management is a consolidation application that you might want to take a look at. Now, as we move on, the next part of this is when we look at Hyperion Financial Management, we have here Pearson's company actually moved their process to a single system. They were on multiple GLs. They went from a 15-day close period to a 5-day close period. And this is with financial management. We go back to Laura's comment about Amegy and what they saved as far as time. These applications are truly designed to reduce the cycle time in which it takes to get information and manage to that information. Next, if we look at another Alcoa, this is one of our stellar accounts that we'd like to talk to because this was a very good implementation of a 20-day close cycle before. They had 78 charts of account, very large global organization. They were down to consolidate. They consolidated across 58 different lines of business. They went from a 20-day close period to a 5-day close period. Pretty phenomenal results. And we can tout these types of results across our customer base all day long. Now, the next we just talked to as part of the critical components to implement within the EPM solution has to do with Hyperion planning, planning best practices, being able to go from financial down to operational drill, being able to incorporate workforce planning, capital planning, all types of functional planning from a single model so that you can predict and simulate how your organization needs to perform going forward, being able to forecast in a real-time fashion. Hyperion planning is a centralized planning system. It's based on Essbase. Essbase is the data engine that drives is the core foundation that drives the performance of Hyperion planning. It is a patented and multi-award-winning application engine. So we use it to establish best practice. From some of the capabilities that Hyperion planning has associated with it, again, it is a web-based application. It has workflow and process management controls in it. We have pre-built applications for workforce as well as capital expenditures. We also have common allocation and calculation routines, and we precede the applications with various types of dimensionality. So for the ability to be able to manage towards different versions, the different types of what-if analysis, to do different type of modeling within the application, and then to serve that application out to everyone within the organization, whether they use a web-based entry or whether they want to interact with Office products. Hyperion Planning is fully interactive with Microsoft Office. Moving forward, just some of the value points that customers have received. If we go to the Oregon Graduate Institute, they were able to improve their variance to budget to actual variance from before it was a 20%, now it's down 7%. They reduced the number of employees that it takes to manage towards a planning application down by from 15 to 8, and the processing time, very similar to what we heard from Amegy, went from 5.5 months down to 6 weeks. And we, again, can tout many of these organizations that have these same types of capabilities. The other way we have here is when we look and survey over 3,000 plus planning customers within the Oracle family, these are some of the common things that we found out about our customers, what they were experiencing with these solutions. You know, many of them have the piece of the cycle time, very elongated cycle times in order to get to build out their budget. The others had a lot of Excel errors. Others had, you know, levels of detail. They wanted to involve more people. But at the end of the day, it's all about ROI. It's all about bringing in money and organizing better, towards organizing for better performance. So what we saw in a cycle time, we saw that overall we saw a 50 to 82% time reduction in the planning cycle time. We saw increased improvement on accuracy and confidence in the information up to 80%. We were able to we replaced and eliminated over 6,000 spreadsheets for these companies and eliminated unnecessary spreadsheets altogether. We were able to transfer users, FTEs, business users, to more productive or analytical capabilities. So there was a lot of analytic gain from these customers, from our customer base, with a Hyperion planning solution. And of course, there were a higher return on investment. I just showed you a return on investment of a $1.7 million for Oregon Graduate Institute. So again, the level in which these organizations were able to plan and involve more people into the process was why they were able to realize higher return on investment. The other two pieces I'm going to go through pretty quickly is profitability. To be able to identify what products, services are offering that are very profitable within your organization. We also have included in the EPM suite of application is a module called Profitability Manager. And it is a packaged application, again, built on top of Essbase, that will allow you to easily roll out and see what products and customers are driving your profitability within your organization. So it gives you full visibility on determining what product mixes need to go in which geographies, what customers need to be marketed to differently in order to scale to a higher degree of revenue. So here is Bank of the West. They implemented Profitability Manager, and again, they were able to identify maxing and mixing products according to their customer base demographics. They were also able to set benchmarks across and marketing goals for new products that were going to be introduced just by utilizing this application. Again, it's based on Essbase, it is well integrated with Hyperion Planning, as well as standalone Essbase applications. And of course, the last product that I'm going to talk to you about before we close up is the ability, what we call strategic finance, the ability to manage the long-term planning goals, the different types of what-if types of analysis, to manage your mergers and acquisition activity, as well as set treasury-based strategies for the organization. So strategic finance has fully integrated financial statements. It does stimulate the effects of mergers and acquisitions for the organization. It is a module that's very highly used by your treasury groups within your organization. So it may not yield a lot of users as far as user needs as far as this, but there are users today within that organization that's still utilizing Excel in order to map out these capabilities. And strategic finance takes away that Excel environment and puts it into a structure. And that structure, again, well integrated with the other EPM applications. Here is an example. They reduced modeling time through mergers from in days into hours. So the theme that we're seeing within EPM applications are really about reduction in time that it takes to get meaningful information to drive business performance. So it connects all the pieces together. What we just saw is we saw an EPM offering that includes planning as the core, but there are other needs within the organization that makes up the EPM suite. from profitability manager to the ability to consolidate and close and adhere to audit controls and adhere to governmental requirements, strategic finance to strategic planning to defining long-term the goals of the organization and how we need to incorporate those within growing the business. So to wrap it up, when we talk about EPM, we always think of our customers as world-class organizations. How do world-class organizations run their business? One, they define and communicate the strategy. Then they want to shorten the close process in order to make sure they're aligning to those strategies. They want to improve planning and forecast processes. And then, of course, they want to extend the profitability and analytical capabilities within their organization. Oracle offers an EPM foundation and footprint of applications that serve these goals to make organizations become a world-class organization. So with that, I'm going to wrap up now, and I'm going to turn it back over to Melanie or Laura.
Thank you, Rhonda. It's Melody. Thanks so much.
Thank you.
So thank you to all of our presenters today. We have a few minutes left for questions, and thanks to those who submitted them. I'm going to try to run through these fairly quickly. So Laura and Bill, most of these are going to be directed at you, Laura. First of all, one of our participants has asked how many dimensions and approximately how many members are there in each of your dimensions?
We have 8 true dimensions in our core application. We've actually got we've got a handful of applications, but the planning application has 8 true dimensions. We've got one, just to run through them really quickly, we've got one for subsidiaries or legal company entities, if you will. We've got a couple of dozen of those. We've got our chart of accounts, which is our general ledger accounts, 2,000 to 3,000 there if you count 2,000 just actual accounts, 3,000 if you count all the hierarchical roll-ups. We've got a balances dimension, which is ending, average, quarter-to-date average, that kind of thing. There's just 3 or 4 of those. We've got our cost centers, which I mentioned is right about 2,000 actual cost centers. But we do a lot of analysis on our cost centers. We roll things up by division, and then we'll roll them up again by function, and then we'll roll them up by line of business. So we have lots of alternative roll-ups on that side. So I'm looking at the statistics now, and we've got like 8,000 members of that dimension if you include all the alternative scenarios. We've got scenarios, which would be actual and budget, that kind of thing, just a handful of those. And we've got the months of the year, of course, the years themselves, and then the versions, so input versus forecast versus reforecast. So 8 true dimensions, a handful in most of them, and then a couple thousand in accounts and another couple thousand in entities, which would be our cost centers.
Okay. Another caller has asked, what has been your ongoing incremental IT staff that's required to maintain and support the Hyperion application you're running?
You know, that's actually a really interesting question, and it can be done several ways. The way that Amegy has decided to staff their Hyperion group is to really staff most of it on the finance side. Our IT resources are pretty limited. We have an application support group which supports lots of applications throughout the bank, and they have stayed static. They've not needed to add any DBAs or anything due to Hyperion, but we do call on them occasionally for some server-side maintenance and that type of thing. But I will say, though, that the staffing within the group, as we've evolved from an Excel-driven planning process to our current process, the headcount has remained roughly the same, but the type of individuals that work in the department has changed quite dramatically. We've gone from more of a before we needed a lot of clerical type of, you know, make 85 copies of this Excel file and hope that you don't break all the links type of individuals, to much more of a group of professionals that are developers. So So like myself, I'm really sort of an IT resource, or would be regarded as such in many organizations, but I report up through the finance side, and I have an MBA in finance. So you can structure that a lot of different ways. I've talked to a lot of colleagues who have done it in much different ways than we have, but the IT staffing per se has stayed flat. It's a long answer to a short question.
What about from the finance side, since the application's really being managed, so to speak, from the finance business? How many people are dedicated full time to managing the Hyperion solution there at Amegy?
In the group that sort of owns Hyperion, we have 5 people, but that includes a manager who's really sort of a superpower user, and then another analyst who is really just another superpower user in terms of providing tons of analysis, and their development work is not so heavy. And then the other 3 of us are really the folks that keep it up and running, if you will. So a couple of really power users, and then some 3 developers.
Melody, one of the things that I've seen as this process over here has developed is that they've gone from basically the same number of people on the financial side, but it's the amount of information that they're able to review and look at, and they've truly gone from preparing information to analyzing information, and even to the point where what Laura has talked about, distributed it down all the way to their end users. But from a standpoint of their financial group, the numbers really haven't changed. It's how they are using those skill sets.
Great. Well, I want to say, and I apologize if we didn't get to all of your questions. We hopefully you found this to be a rich discussion. I want to thank Laura Davenport, Bill Harding, and Rhonda Great for joining us today and sharing the story at Amegy and sharing with us more about the Oracle application suite that supports these processes. For those of you who are interested in finding out more about how potentially your company can gain benefit from improved processes that we've talked about today, please feel free to reach out to Bill Harding or myself at either the phone number or email address is listed here within the slide that you're looking at. Again, thank you for taking your lunch hour, for those of you that are doing this over lunch, morning or evening, to join us today. And look forward to hosting you at an upcoming event. Stay tuned.